everybody and welcome back. My name is Mel and today we're going to be doing a thriller and horror recommendations for sci-fi fantasy readers. Now, these are recommendations that I think anybody will enjoy. These are not just for sci-fi fantasy readers. I feel like anybody would really enjoy these and they are good fall type reads. I actually will be doing another recommendation video coming next week, which is thriller and horror for fall. And I feel like there could have been a lot of overlap between these two videos. And so if you kind of like some of the books that are mentioned in this one, I also think that you would enjoy the books mentioned in that one and vice versa. So hopefully these are accessible for anybody. The reason that I chose a lot of these is because they have elements that are found in fantasy books or paranormal books, for example. We've got a lot of different things in here, and hopefully if you are a sci-fi fantasy reader and you just kind of want to branch out, just dip your toe into thriller and horror for fall, maybe you'll find something on here that you enjoy. So I guess without further ado, let's jump on in. The first one is going to be no surprise for anyone, and that is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. Of course, everyone has heard about this book, and the sequel actually comes out in January of 2023, and I am dying. The cover is just so deliciously gross. So this one follows Alex Stern, who has had kind of a rough life. No, she is part of Yale's freshman class, and there are these different houses, and all of these different houses have different rules and different kind of paranormal capabilities, and the Ninth House has to do with demons and magic. And I really enjoyed this one. I disliked it for reasons differently that other people might have disliked it. The world building could have been a little bit stronger, but I do think we will get more of that in the second book. And the fact that there is world building at all means that some fantasy readers might find this appealing. And then I also thought that Alex was a little bit of a weaker character, but again, I feel like that was intentional and I do think that we will see her grow. I gave this one a 4-star, and so I do recommend that if you're looking for kind of a dark academia fall fantasy type story, that you check this one out. Next up, we have the Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This one is carrying over from two different timelines. We have one character that is in 1982 and she is wanting to move to New York, but she takes a job as the night clerk for the Sundown Motel and she realizes that something just is not right. Then we also have a different POV, which is 2017 in upstate New York. And Carly has just never been able to let go of the story of her Aunt Viv, who disappeared from the Sundown Motel before she was ever born. So we have a little bit of a mystery, a little bit of thriller, a little bit of like paranormal undertone that I think could appeal to sci-fi and fantasy readers. So I did really enjoy this one. Next up, we have A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. I know that Paul Tremblay is a little bit of a sore spot for some readers. I know that we have the Head Full of Ghosts camp and then the Cabin at the End of the World camp. I haven't read Cabin at the End of the World, but I did really enjoy A Head Full of Ghosts. I think it would appeal to sci-fi fantasy readers because there is just this undertone of what is going on, and it does have a slightly paranormal maybe twinge. And I think that that was one of the things that I did enjoy the most about this book is you don't know what reality really is. And again, for the speculative fiction crowd, the sci-fi fantasy crowd, I think that that might work for you. This one is very The Exorcist vibes. It does have a little bit of graphicness to it. So if you don't like horror that's graphic, maybe shy away from this one. It's about a young girl that starts to act very strange and her family's trying to figure out what's going on. Then they think that she might be possessed, so they hire a film crew to come in and kind of document the exorcism. And we are being told in like the flashbacks to that, and then we're also being told from the point of view of this woman that dealt with all of that when she was a kid. So very interesting, really enjoyed it. This one was good for me. Then we have The Patient by Jasper DeWitt. This is an odd one. It was first recommended to me by Gabby from Gabby Reads, and I did not know what to expect, but I thought I would give it a go. It is stupid short, and it is about a young psychiatrist who takes a job at a mental hospital in New England, and he's really trying to just work out the most difficult, notorious patient, Joe, who is 41 years old, and he was admitted to the hospital at age 6. No one's ever been able to successfully diagnose him. The only thing that's consistent is that each person has been driven to madness or suicide that has ever encountered him. The hospital now only allows like minimal contact with Joe, and this psychiatrist is determined to get close to him and to figure out exactly what is going on with him, but he finds himself in a bit of a pickle and does not realize that there is a lot more to Joe than he could have ever imagined. This one is sort of boogeyman under your bed vibes, and it's interesting. I will say that it's a little bit weird, which might work well for some sci-fi or fantasy readers, especially if you lean more on like the speculative fiction kind of side. This one was one that I really enjoyed, especially when I was reading it. It's super, super quick, and I think that it has a lot of interesting discussions, so I would give this one a go. Then we have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This one I read quite a long time ago. It is a fan favorite, and it's about a middle-aged man that returns to his childhood home in Sussex, England to attend a funeral. Although the house that he's always lived in is long gone, but he's drawn to the house at the end of the road, where when he was 11, he encountered the most remarkable girl. But once he hasn't really thought about her in decades, but once he gets there, he does start to kind of reminisce and think back to their adventures together when he was young. But the past is really strange, it's really frightening, and sometimes he just doesn't want to remember and doesn't want to think about it. Very odd, but does have kind of a fantasy dreamlike state to it. The audiobook is read by Neil Gaiman, and I feel like if you've ever read any of his works before, then you're kind of expecting that just odd, dreamlike, mysterious, fantastical kind of writing style, and this one is no exception to that. I do want to reread it, kind of refresh my memory, because I remember enjoying it, but not maybe loving it to the extent that everyone else seemed to, and so I think I just missed something in that beginning, and now that my tastes are kind of changing, I think that it's really time for me to give this another try. Next up, we have one that I know is going to appeal to the sci-fi crowd, and that is, of course, Recursion by Blake Crouch. I'm one of those weirdos that liked both Recursion and Dark Matter pretty equally well. I thought they were both extremely well done. They are similar stories, but in my mind, different enough to completely stand out on their own. And Recursion follows a guy that has recently lost his family, and he is trying to investigate this phenomenon called the false memory syndrome, where victims start to go mad remembering things that never actually happened to them. And once he starts trying to face the truth, he realizes that the attacks are not just on our minds, but they're actually fabrics of the past. He has to work with Helena and try to figure out how to stop basically the world from ending. I had a great time with this. It is a super quick read. I would not consider this horror. This does lean more sci-fi thriller, but it was awesome, and I definitely recommend that if you have not read a Blake Crouch, you pick up either Recursion, Dark Matter, or Upgrade ASAP. Next up, we have one of those books that when I first read it, I just wasn't sure how I felt about it, and I'll explain why kind of in a second, but that one is Into the Drowning Deep by Mara Grant. I continue to think about this book to this day and read it like 3-ish, 4-ish years ago. This one follows our main character who has lost her sister to a mockumentary that went out to explore the Mariana Trench and never came back. And there was some footage that did come back from the ship, from the documentary, that was horrifying, and no one believed that it actually existed or actually happened. So now the government has decided to get together a band of individuals, marine biologists, linguists, mercenaries, doctors, all of these different specialties to go out there and try to figure out, was this video real or was it completely fabricated, and what is in the Mariana Trench. So I will say that this book is probably more for my sci-fi fans because it is very science heavy, and that's part of the reason that I know a lot of people either DNF this book or didn't enjoy it, is because the beginning is quite slow and there is a lot of science to it. But once we hit about the halfway mark, action really starts to happen and things start to speed up. The horror elements come into play, kind of a fantastical element comes into play, and I loved how realistic this book felt. Because it is a heavy sci-fi based story, it did make the story drag, but it also made it so realistic. And I still think about this. I wonder every time I look at the ocean, what are we missing? What are we not seeing? What actually might live there that possibly was in this book? So thought it was extremely well done, well crafted. There's a prequel novella to this called Rolling in the Deep that is about the mockumentary. I personally would say if you're just really not sure if you're gonna like it, you can try Rolling in the Deep first, but I read Into the Drowning Deep first, and I think this one does hit harder and better if you read it and then Rolling in the Deep. So kind of personal preference, but I would recommend, if you can stand the sciencey part, to get through this one first. Then we have one I sort of hesitate to recommend, but I'm gonna do it anyway, and that is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. I liked this book. I didn't love this book, but I do think it could work for my SFF readers. This one is kind of Lord of the Flies inspired, about girls that are on this island and strange things start to happen to their body one by one, and they can't get off of the island. And there is some experiments happening, and that's why I think it might work for my sci-fi crowd. This one is young adult, and it has a very open-ended ending. So if that is not your thing, this is not going to be for you. To my knowledge, there's no sequel planned. It just ends the way it ends. So if you're kind of looking for a little body horror, you liked Lord of the Flies with a slightly sci-fi undertone, then this one could work well for you. Next up, we have one of my personal favorites that is not going to be for everyone, and surprisingly enough, it is a young adult, and that is Rules for Vanishing by Kate Alice Marshall. This is the first book in what is a companion series, and it's about a girl whose sister has gone missing when she follows a road, and the sister decides that she is going to try to call upon this ghost and follow her sister into this road or this world and try to get her back. This one is told in various formats, and that's one of the things that I like so much about it. We have our video evidence transcripts, we have like text messages back and forth, you have the actual narrative, you have exhibit A, exhibit B, you have different interviews. So I really enjoyed the mixed media format of this, but I know if you don't like mixed media, then definitely don't try this one. It is young adult horror, young adult kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call it fantasy. It does lean more on the paranormal side of things, but I had a great time with it. Next up, if you're looking for kind of a fantasy witchy type read, then I might recommend The Ravens by Cass Morgan and Danielle Page. This one is sort of a dark academia type read. It's set in a college, and it's about a coven in a sorority. So the coven is the sorority. It's not one that you would just rush and be able to get into. It's set in Georgia, and it is mostly filled of legacies. Women that were in this coven in college and now have sent their daughters there. This one is a little slasher, a little witchy, and a little paranormal, all kind of mixed in together. Would I say it's the best thing I've ever read? No, not necessarily, but it was so much fun, and I'm really looking forward to reading the sequel hopefully soon. So if you kind of want to dip your toe into the witchy side of things, or you want to dip your toe into a little slasher, then this one actually might work well for you. And then we have one that I absolutely adored, and again, is not going to be for everyone, but it was so good, and that is The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher. This is actually inspired by The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, and I loved this book. It is so quirky, so weird, a little bit of horror, a little bit of scare, a little bit of portal fantasy. So that is part of the elements that I think my sci-fi fantasy readers might really enjoy. It is set in a taxidermy store. When our main character gets a divorce, she goes to live with her uncle to kind of get her feet back up under her, but there's this weird rabbit thing or otter thing that is kind of following her around. There is a door that she has found that leads to a prison-like area, and then she finds out leads into other worlds. And so she and her quirky gay best friend must figure out how to close all of this off before it ends up taking over our universe. And I just adored this. I thought it was the perfect blend of quirky, the perfect blend of horror, and not an overwhelming in-your-face portal fantasy. Good times. Definitely recommend this one. Then I would also recommend The Lighthouse Witches by C.J. Cook. Again, this one is part thriller, part fantasy, part portal fantasy. It's been a while since I read this one, but I do remember enjoying it. I would not call it horror. I would call it more of a thriller, but I'll just read you the little tagline really quick. It said, 2 sisters go missing on a remote Scottish island. 20 years later, one is found, but she's still the same age as when she disappeared. The secrets of the witches have reached across centuries in this chilling gothic horror, or gothic thriller. So this one, like I said, it is a little fantasy, it is a little portal fantasy, some kind of mystery thriller elements to it as well, and I had a really good time with it, and think you might as well. And then last but not least is my last horror recommendation, and that is The Call by Peter O'Gulan. This one is pretty short. It's 307 pages, and it is definitely a horror book. It's about a world where you could disappear any minute and find yourself in the sickly land, and I believe it's Scottish Irish, so I think that it has a little bit of like fairy. If I remember correctly, there are basically fairy monsters, and at any point before a certain age, you could disappear into this land, and you could be there a day, you could be there a year, you could be there 10 years, and when you hear the horn, you know that whoever lives there has got your scent and the hunt has already begun. Can you survive the call? And this one was more of a survivalist horror kind of story. It did keep me on the edge of my seat. I do remember it being quite graphic. This one does have a very unique world, but not a lot of world building. It's much more centered around that one immediate time. It is a series called The Greyland, but I have not read The Invasion yet. I have only read The Call, so I don't know if the sequel is any good, but I did enjoy The Call. It's a quick, good horror, spooky type read, so give it a try. Just kind of be aware that it is a very odd horror book going into it. Okay, so I think those are all of my thriller horror reads for sci-fi fantasy readers. Hopefully you find something in this that you think is interesting. I really did enjoy all of these books. Some I loved more than others, but I would recommend them all. I am so ready for spooky season, and so I'm hoping that my fellow sci-fi fantasy lovers can also find something for their spooky soul. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you want to get in touch with me a little bit more, links to my Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads are all linked for you down below. If you liked this video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you wanna, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!